On the night everything changed, when the last of the deep space antennas should have been asleep under the cold November silence, a whisper came through the static. 4 letters, no signature, no modulation pattern known to human science, just one impossible transmission from the third confirmed interstellar object ever recorded by humankind. Soon. That was all. No context, no explanation, no repeat signal, just that single word, drifting into the command center at 3:17 in the morning like a threat slipped under a locked door, and the moment the spectrograph operator saw it scroll across the feed, he stopped breathing, because nothing, absolutely nothing about 3I-ATLS suggested it could emit anything at all. It wasn't supposed to have a magnetic field strong enough to push a signal. It wasn't rotating in a way that matched artificial beaming, and the tracking data for the past 6 weeks showed no natural process that could possibly compress or modulate particles that cleanly. The operator rewound the feed twice, then a third time, and on the 4th playback, he noticed something even worse than the message itself. The signal hadn't originated from noise in the background, it had come directly from the object. Not reflected, not scattered, emitted. For the first 20 minutes, the team did what scientists always do when the universe behaves like it wants to be heard. They assumed it was their own equipment failing. They blamed a glitch in the software, a bad line of code, corrupted telemetry, anything except the one explanation that would force them to rewrite every assumption about interstellar visitors. But at 3:41, when the second dish in the Chilean array independently picked up the same narrowband anomaly pointed at the same coordinates, the speculation collapsed. 2 stations don't hallucinate together. 2 systems don't invent the same error at the same millisecond. The message was real. And then the fear began. Not panic, not chaos. Scientists don't unravel that theatrically. But a slow, quiet dread that crawled across every workstation like a shadow that refused to be named. In the hours that followed, the team locked the data behind more security protocols than some military satellites. But even encryption couldn't protect them from the weight of those 4 letters. Soon. Soon what? Soon for whom? Soon for us. Every specialist in the room understood the stakes without speaking them out loud. No natural object sends coherent messages toward Earth. No comet, no asteroid, no wandering interstellar relic shapes a signal with edges that sharp. And 3I-ATLS, with its tumbling, irregular body and impossible-to-model trajectory, had already been the source of whispered arguments between departments and tense late-night phone calls that never made it into official logs. They had been tracking its behavior for months, its odd brightness cycles, its razor-clean light curve, the way its rotation seemed to stutter as if reacting to forces not measurable by any conventional instruments, and now they had something worse than suspicion. They had intent. At first, they tried decoding the message mathematically, assuming that the word was an artifact of human filtering, some accidental pattern that software interpreted as English. But when they removed every layer of processing, every correction algorithm, every human-shaped assumption they could think of, the final output didn't dissolve into meaningless noise. It stayed exactly the same. Soon. Not a translation. Not a coincidence, a choice. By dawn, the director of the observatory had issued a blackout order. No communication of any kind, no leaks, no informal discussion, not even among teams who'd worked side by side for 10 years. But secrecy does nothing to slow the mind, and within the silence, a new kind of tension grew. Each scientist turning the word over in their thoughts, each arriving at their own private version of the same horrifying conclusion. Because if 3I-ATLS could send a message, then it could observe. And if it could observe, then it could aim. And if it could aim, then the object rushing into the solar system on a path no existing gravitational model could accurately predict might not be a passive traveler at all. And yet for the next 2 days, nothing happened. No follow-up signal, no change in brightness, no deviation from the projected course. 3I ATLS glided silently through space like a predator freezing so its prey will step closer. The quiet made the message worse. The weight made the message unbearable. The scientists worked in shifts with no real rest, running simulations until the supercomputers overheated, searching for any physical phenomenon that could mimic intentional communication. They tried radiation spikes, they tried cosmic ray interference, they tried every natural cause they could conjure, but every result only tightened the knot around them. The signal locked on to Earth's coordinate frame. Not the array, not the hemisphere, Earth. Someone suggested rotational coincidence. Maybe the object had emitted a burst of particles randomly and Earth had simply rotated into alignment at the perfect millisecond. But the probability was so low, it bordered on mathematical fiction. Someone else suggested it was directed at the Sun, not Earth, but the vector didn't match. Someone else proposed the signal wasn't a message at all, just an unexpected resonance triggered by deep space conditions, until they compared the frequency structure with decades of cosmological background data and discovered there was no match in any archive on the planet. At 6:32 the next evening, Dr. Ranga Patel, whose entire life's work revolved around noise analysis, said something that stiffened every spine in the control room. It's not just a message, it's a timestamp. The room fell silent as she explained. Natural signals scatter. They stretch. They warp. They don't arrive in perfect integer spacing like this waveform had. The transmission came in 3 pulses, each separated by 1.000 seconds, with the final pulse containing the 4-letter packet. You don't get symmetry like that from anything in nature. Something had counted those seconds. Something had chosen them. And something had chosen the word. By the 3rd night, the object's trajectory had shifted again. Subtle, barely measurable, but just enough to make the orbital mechanics team whisper in strained voices. Objects from interstellar space are chaotic, unpredictable, pushed by invisible forces that we can't properly model. But 3I ATLS wasn't behaving like chaos. It was behaving like purpose. It wasn't drifting, it was correcting, like a thing that had noticed it was being watched, like a thing adjusting its approach. At 1:20 in the morning, one of the junior analysts made the mistake of saying what everyone had been avoiding. What if the signal wasn't meant to scare us? What if it was meant to warn us? But the room didn't buy it. The word didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a countdown. And as the hours passed, the tone of the lab shifted. Scientists who had once spoken in calm rationality now whispered to each other with voices clenched tight around fear, glancing at screens as if to expect the object to suddenly accelerate, or change direction, or break open into something with a shape no comet should ever have. The government liaison arrived just after 2 o'clock in the morning and read the message twice before asking the question no one wanted to hear. Does this object pose a direct threat to Earth? The room froze.
No one answered. Eventually the lead astronomer spoke, each word heavy as stone. We can't determine intent, but the signal proves capability. And capability changes everything. They tried to expand the monitoring network, pulling data from Australia, South Africa, Greenland, any place with a clear view of the incoming object. But every new data set showed the same thing. The trajectory was tightening. Not dramatically, Not enough for the public or even other scientists to notice, but enough for the specialists to feel their stomachs twist with the awful possibility that the object wasn't just passing through, it was targeting. At 4:09 in the morning, the servers caught a second anomaly, a faint spike in the same frequency band as the original signal. So faint it almost vanished into background radiation. They amplified it, cleaned it, ran it through every filter. But it wasn't a message. It was a tone, a long, low, sustained harmonic that throbbed like a distant engine, resonating with a precision that made the skin crawl. Natural objects don't hum. Natural objects don't choose a pitch. And yet, here it was, singing across the void. The team monitored the tone for 19 minutes and 14 seconds until it abruptly cut off. The silence afterward felt physical, heavy, as if the whole room were holding its breath. And then the telemetry changed. Only by a fraction, only by the smallest fraction detectable by the human instruments, but it changed. 3I/Atlas angled half a degree closer to the ecliptic plane, half a degree closer to Earth's orbital path, half a degree closer to us. And for the first time since the message arrived, someone said, barely audible, "It's coming." After that, the tension became a living thing. People paced without realizing they were moving. Coffee cups sat untouched. Screens glowed with numbers no one wanted to read. Every simulation they ran ended in scenarios that hung just within the margin of catastrophe. Close approaches, unexpectedly deep passes, gravitational slingshot dynamics that made no astrophysical sense at all. There is a difference between coincidence and pattern, between drift and aim, between nature and decision. And 3I/Atlas had just crossed that line. When the sun finally rose over the observatory, painting the metal of the antenna towers in gold, the director gathered the team and spoke with a voice dry from sleepless nights. He said, "The message implied action. This course change confirms it. We are no longer observing an object. We are being observed by it." No one disagreed. No one spoke. And deep in the servers, where the data streamed silently from telescopes half a world away, the latest orbital plot appeared, blinking red at the edges. The prediction now placed 3I/Atlas on a near-Earth trajectory within 96 days. Not a collision course, not yet, but close enough that one more correction, a tiny one, barely perceptible, would bring it straight toward our planet, straight toward us. The word echoed again in the minds of everyone in the room. Soon. And that was when the fear finally shifted into something colder, heavier, something with the weight of inevitability. Because messages don't just announce intent, they announce timelines. And the universe had just given us one. The second signal didn't arrive as a word. It arrived as a tremor, an electronic quiver that ran through every dish in the southern network at the exact same millisecond, like 3I Atlas had reached across 50 million kilometers of vacuum and tapped the planet on the shoulder, just to make sure we were still paying attention. The engineers insisted it wasn't a real transmission, just an electromagnetic surge hitting multiple facilities at once, but they couldn't explain why that surge carried the same harmonic fingerprint as the first message, or why it lined up perfectly with the object's rotational window, or why every analysis graph displayed the same impossible symmetry that only deliberate signal shaping could create. At 2:13 in the morning, the observatory fell quiet as the waveform unfolded across the monitors, an intricate chain of repeating crests, so precise they might as well have been carved with a scalpel. And then the tremor stabilized into a single narrow-band line that held steady for 13 seconds before vanishing. No message this time. No soon. Just confirmation that the first transmission had not been a mistake. But the real horror began when they overlaid the new data on the trajectory models, because something had shifted again. Not as dramatically as before, but with intention clearer than any number could hide. 3I Atlas was tightening its approach a second time, shaving another fraction of a degree from its path, coiling its orbit closer to Earth like an arrow adjusting itself mid-flight. Objects do not self-correct, but this one did. As the updated plots flashed red across the screens, the director whispered the thought no one wanted to say aloud. It's locking in. In the hours that followed, the lab felt less like a research facility and more like a bunker, each monitor a shrinking window into a future no one knew how to stop. Scientists who once argued about decimal points now spoke in clipped, brittle tones as if any sound above a whisper might draw the object's attention. But fear has a strange way of sharpening curiosity, and within the dread, a new question began to burn. Why tell us? Why send a message at all? Why announce soon and then move closer in two deliberate corrections? If the object meant to strike Earth, it wouldn't need to communicate. If it meant to pass harmlessly, the message was pointless. So what was it doing? The radio astronomer who had first seen the original signal leaned back from the console and rubbed the bridge of his nose, his voice low, hollow. It's behavior. This thing isn't just operating under physics, it's behaving. And behavior implies motive. The first hint of what that motive might be came from the spectrometry team, who had been analyzing the surface composition of 3I Atlas for weeks. They didn't find anything unusual, not at first, just the typical interstellar mix of carbon chains, dust, volatile ices, and mineral fragments found in most long-traveling bodies. But the new tremor signal had passed through the object, not around it, and something in the returning emission didn't match the earlier readings. One of the deeper layers, previously invisible because of distance, was now detectable, and what it reflected was wrong. Too smooth, too uniform, too geometric. Natural stone doesn't reflect radiation like that. Frozen volatiles don't emit harmonic edges, and nothing drifting between stars for hundreds of millions of years retains such clean structure. It's hollow, one of the analysts whispered, staring at the render as if it might reach out and swallow her through the screen. But hollow wasn't the right word. Hollow would imply empty. Whatever was inside 3I Atlas wasn't empty at all. The more they processed the signal return, the clearer the shape became. Curving architecture hidden beneath the surface, like ribs beneath ancient skin. And deeper still, something that resembled chambers. Not random pockets, not voids created by thermal fracturing. Chambers. Constructed spaces. The realization crept across the room like a cold wind. This wasn't a comet. It wasn't an asteroid. It was a vessel. And the thing inside it had just knocked on our door. The atmosphere in the command center collapsed into a suffocating stillness. No one dared to speak, as if the truth itself might break something fragile and irreparable. But numbers don't care about fear. and the models continued updating relentlessly, frame after frame, bringing 3I Atlas closer to the plane of Earth's orbit. The government liaison stood rigid near the entrance, his hand trembling around a phone he no longer knew how to use. Every protocol he had been trained for had just dissolved in the face of something older and far more deliberate than human contingency plans could account for. At 4:20, the quiet broke. A technician monitoring the Doppler shift shouted for everyone to look. The object had accelerated, just slightly, just enough to register, but the timing matched the second tremor signal perfectly, as if the surge had been a trigger, as if the object had been waiting for something, as if the soon had not been a warning or a threat, but a schedule. And now the schedule had started. 5 minutes later, all 3 arrays, Chile, Australia, and South Africa, picked up a new anomaly. This time it wasn't a tremor, it wasn't noise, it wasn't a message, it was a pulse. A deep, resonant, rhythmic throb that repeated every 57 seconds. Heartbeat, someone said before they could stop themselves. They didn't mean it literally, but the word infected the room. Heartbeat. A heartbeat coming from something the size of a small mountain. A heartbeat from an object older than human civilization. A heartbeat approaching Earth. The director demanded analysis. The computers demanded time, but time was the one thing the universe had suddenly stopped giving. The pulse grew stronger over the next hour, not louder, but cleaner, sharpening into a tone with harmonics that mirrored each other perfectly, like language stripped down to its bones, like a countdown disguised as a song. The object was now moving faster than any passive body its size should, closing the distance with each rhythmic pulse. No one knew how, no one wanted to. The truth was already too large to hold. At sunrise, the orbital mechanics team delivered the report that cracked whatever hope remained. If the current acceleration continues, 3I Atlas will intercept Earth's orbital path in 82 days. Not pass near it, intercept it. And there was still no explanation, no motive, no indication of purpose other than the single message carved into every mind in the room. Soon. The fear that followed wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it was quiet, heavy, the kind of fear that settles into bones and waits. But fear wasn't the only thing growing. Doubt spread like a slow poison. Doubt in the models, doubt in the assumptions, doubt in the hope that the object might change course again, this time away from Earth instead of toward it. And beneath that doubt, a darker possibility began to take shape. What if the message had never been intended for us alone? What if soon wasn't a threat, but an announcement? For 3 days the pulse continued, every 57 seconds without fail, the universe's most patient metronome. Each beat tightened its trajectory. Each beat refined its approach. Each beat drew it closer to Earth. On the 4th day, the pulse doubled. No one knew what it meant. No one wanted to guess. But every person in the observatory felt the same sinking truth forming beneath their ribs. The first message had been the beginning. The pulses were the continuation. And something else, something stronger, something final, was coming next. Soon.
The pulse didn't just double. It thickened, warped, stretching itself into something that didn't feel like a signal anymore, but like pressure on the air, as if the transmission were coming from inside the atmosphere instead of across interstellar space. The room froze as the waveform spilled across the monitors in a shape no one had ever seen. Not a curve, not a spike, but something layered, overlapping, like two voices speaking in unison but slightly out of sync, creating a vibration that made the metal tables hum. The analysts scrambled to stabilize the feed, but it wasn't the equipment struggling, it was them. The sound wasn't even audible, yet their skulls felt tight, their breaths shallow, their heartbeats out of rhythm. And then someone realized the worst part. The pulse had synced itself to Earth's rotation. The timing wasn't solar, it wasn't orbital, it was geographic. 3IA Atlas was coordinating with the planet. At 7:22 in the morning, the pulse changed again, splitting into 3 layers, each one forming a structure that looked less like noise and more like instructions. And when the harmonics were isolated, cleaned, and slowed, the room went silent as the message revealed itself. Not words this time, not language in any human sense, but a pattern unmistakable to anyone who had ever worked with anomaly detection. 3 points, 3 intervals, 3 markers, a countdown. But to what? And why? As the scientists stared at the pattern, the orbital display beside it updated with a soft digital chime, the kind normally ignored. But this time, the new plot hit them like a blow to the chest. The object had changed trajectory again. A third correction, sharper than the previous 2. Now it was no longer merely intersecting Earth's orbital path. Now it was shaping toward a rendezvous, a meeting point, right where Earth would be in 74 days. "This isn't an impact course," someone whispered with dry lips. "This is interception." The director didn't even respond. He simply lowered himself into a chair as if gravity had doubled. The room held its breath as the pulse grew louder, metaphorically, not physically, taking up more and more of the equipment's bandwidth, until half the receivers saturated under the strain, and the engineers had no choice but to shut them down. But shutting them down didn't stop the signal. It continued pulsing through every dish that remained, repeating the same 3-interval pattern as if urging them to decode faster, or warning them that they were already late. The Chile array sent in new thermal data, unexpected heat signatures beneath the object's crust, blooming outward like something waking up after a long sleep. The South African telescope caught faint flashes across the surface, microbursts of energy, too regular to be random, too directional to be natural. The Australian site detected an electromagnetic ripple that surged outward in a sphere, then snapped back in like a heartbeat contracting. Each facility reported different anomalies, but the conclusion was the same. 3IA Atlas was activating, not fragmenting, not venting, activating. And all of it began after the first signal. Soon, the tension in the control room thickened into something physical, something you could almost taste in the recycled air. No one talked anymore. They murmured. And beneath every word was a second voice, unspoken but understood by all. "We shouldn't have answered." At 10:49, the first true break in the pattern occurred. The pulse halted mid-cycle. The monitors blacked out for a full second, every one of them, across every global facility, and when they came back online, a new data stream had replaced the old one. It wasn't a pulse this time. It wasn't a tremor. It wasn't even a message. It was an image. Low resolution, fractured, raw, but unmistakable. Earth. The object had scanned Earth. Not photographed, scanned. Not with visible light, not with infrared, but with a deep spectrum sweep that penetrated the planet's magnetic field and mapped the continental structure with surgical precision. They watched as the image sharpened, oceans, continents, fault lines, rendering the world like a patient lying open on an operating table. And then the scan narrowed, tightened, focused on one region, one city, one building. The building they were in. Every person in the control room felt their stomach drop into cold emptiness. 3IA Atlas had found them. It knew where the signal had been received. It was responding. A junior analyst's voice cracked as she whispered, "It's communicating directly." But the image cut off abruptly, replaced by a single band of compressed data so dense it took the processors nearly half a minute to decompress. When the output finally stabilized, every person leaned forward at once. 4 letters again, but not the same. Not soon. This time, here. Someone swayed on their feet. Someone else covered their mouth. The director whispered, almost inaudibly, "This isn't possible." But the object wasn't done. The moment the new message ended, the sensors recorded another trajectory shift, this one unmistakable. A burn. A directed burn, as if something inside the object had fired a thruster buried deep, pushing the comet-like shell into a new arc, straight toward Earth. Not 74 days, not 70, 56. At the new velocity, 3IA Atlas would reach Earth's vicinity in 56 days from now. The pulse resumed, faster now, 37 seconds between beats. The harmonic pattern sharpened, the tone rising so high that the instruments began clipping. The servers overheated. One of the engineers muttered a prayer. And then the strangest thing of all happened. The pulse stopped. Completely. Silence. Total. Absolute. Not the silence of space. Not the silence of dead equipment. A silence that felt deliberate. Waiting. Watching. The scientists stared into the void of the monitors, every muscle wired with dread. And then from the back of the lab, a small chime sounded, one terminal still active, still decoding the final fragment of the data packet. A second message appeared. Not a word this time, not a scan, a waveform. Complex, layered, mathematical. At first it seemed abstract, just interference, maybe a residual echo, but when they ran it through pattern recognition, an outline emerged. A shape. Long, narrow, curved, symmetrical. A silhouette of something hidden inside 3IA Atlas. Something large, something engineered, something waiting to emerge. The director stared at it with hollow eyes and whispered, "We've been tracking a shell." For hours afterwards, the room remained locked in a stunned, fragile quiet. The weight of what they'd seen pressed down on every mind, every breath, every hesitation. A vessel, because there was no other word for it now, was approaching Earth. It had targeted their facility. It had sent messages. It had counted down. And now it had revealed the shape of whatever was inside. But the worst realization came when a young orbital intern, pale as paper, ran a retrograde projection of the vessel's motion before it entered the solar system, before the first signal, before the object was even discovered. The path was too clean, too smooth, too deliberate. It had not been wandering, it had not been drifting, it had not been lost. It had been heading toward Earth for a very long time. The object had not found Earth by accident. It had not detected Earth's signal first. It had not discovered us. It had been coming here, purposefully. And somewhere inside that shell, inside the vast dormant structure now hurtling toward the planet with the precision of a blade, something was waiting to arrive. Soon. But not soon anymore. Now, here.
The world didn't know anything yet. The news feed still buzzed with politics, storms, market crashes, the usual noise of a species too busy to notice the shadow crossing space toward it. But inside the observatory,
Inside that sealed room humming with dying servers and stale recycled air, the truth had already begun to split the scientists apart, the same way 3I Atlas had peeled itself away from silence. The fourth message arrived before dawn, not as a pulse, not an image, but as a rupture in the data stream so violent the lights flickered and every instrument spiked into the red. The object wasn't sending anymore. It was taking, pulling bandwidth, pulling telemetry, pulling control of the very systems used to watch it. The screens warped, lines bending into curves that didn't match any form of signal distortion the engineers had ever seen. One by one, parameters vanished. Orbital plots, Doppler shifts, spectral readings, until only a single live feed remained. The deep field camera pointed straight at 3I Atlas. At first the feed looked normal, a distant point of reflected starlight tumbling silently across the void. But the brightness was wrong, too strong, too steady, as if something inside the object had begun to glow. The director leaned close, breath fogging the glass of the monitor. "It's opening," he whispered. And he was right. A seam appeared, thin, vertical, glowing white-hot against the black. Then another, perpendicular. The surface cracked like an eggshell scored from the inside. And in the middle of that cross-shaped fracture, something moved. The signal monitors screamed back to life all at once, flooded with a torrent of data so dense the machines choked on it. Not a message, not a pattern, instruments reading their own reflections, as if the object were scanning the scanners. One of the analysts shouted for someone to shut down the receivers, but the systems wouldn't respond. The object had hijacked the array entirely. Then, slowly, impossibly, the shell began to peel back, not explosively, not violently, with intention, with grace. Like petals opening on a flower made of stone and metal and centuries of interstellar dust. Beneath the fractured exterior, a second surface glimmered, smooth, dark, curved like the hull of something engineered to slip through space with purpose. A vessel inside a vessel, a skin wrapped around a heart, and the heart was waking. As each petal-like shard drifted away, a deep resonance filled the control room, silent to the ear, but vibrating through bone, a pressure more felt than heard. The camera struggled to focus through the interference. The object, once just a speck, now reflected light in patterns too geometrical to be natural. Then the feed sharpened for a moment, just one clear moment, and they saw it. A ring, perfect, symmetrical, floating within the open shell like an iris within an eye. And at its center, a void so black it seemed to swallow the pixels around it. "A portal," one of the scientists muttered, and someone told him to stop talking before the idea could root itself. But the idea was already rooted, because that circular void felt less like a structure and more like a mouth, a doorway, an entry point, something meant to release. The lights in the room dimmed, first a flicker, then a low throb, as the object aligned itself with Earth's position. The trajectory update blinked red. 53 days. The vessel inside the shell rotated, slowly, deliberately, as if testing its limbs after a long hibernation. And then the ring brightened, not with light, with purpose. A concentrated beam of mathematics streamed into the detectors, raw, elegant, terrifying. A sequence, not prime numbers, not coordinates, not a language. A blueprint. The computers processed the flood of data and rendered its meaning before anyone could stop them. A map. A 3D model of Earth's magnetosphere, oscillating in synchronization with the vessel's rotation. Another frame. Earth's upper atmosphere, pressure layers, thermal gradients. Another. The biosphere, glowing with chlorophyll signatures. Another.
the electromagnetic grid pulsing with human-made signals. Another, the neural activity patterns of the human brain. Someone gasped. Another, the human heart. The data sequenced itself into a chilling progression. Planet, life, communication, cognition, biology. Not exploration, not curiosity. Categorization, assessment, a dissection before the cut. The ring at the center of the vessel pulsed once, twice, like an eye narrowing in recognition. Then the next sequence arrived. It was shorter, sharper, and when decrypted, it formed a single phrase. Open the sky. The scientists recoiled. Someone dropped a mug, but no one flinched. This can't be literal, one of the physicists said, but his voice was too thin to be convincing. It's symbolic. It has to be symbolic. But symbolic messages don't alter their sender's trajectory. Symbolic messages don't heat the hull of a vessel until the spectral readings climb into unknown bands. Symbolic messages don't track the neural signatures of the species receiving them. The director stepped forward. He said, slow, careful, is it asking if we can communicate with them? No one answered. They didn't need to. The vessel inside 3I Atlas rotated again, aligning its ring directly with the direction of the incoming trajectory. And then the object did something that tore the last threads of doubt from the room. It began to accelerate, without thrust. No jets, no particles, no radiation signature. Nothing pushing it, nothing pulling it. The vessel simply decided to move faster and space obeyed. The velocity curve spiked. The orbital prediction updated in a flash of red that felt like a scream. 53 days became 49. 49 became 46. 46 became 45. The vessel wasn't just heading to Earth, it was choosing when to arrive. The ring flared again. Another data burst hit the sensors, and the screen filled with a new sequence. Sharper than the last, frantic, almost irritated. This time the computers struggled to parse it, the structures tangled and compressed as if the sender was losing patience. After several attempts, the translation engine displayed 2 words. Stop resisting. For the first time since the first soon, someone in the room began to cry. Quietly, without shame, because there was no resistance to stop. There had never been a chance to resist at all. The vessel was rewriting the rules with every minute that passed. The room shook with the sudden, deep-frequency tremor. Lights fluttered, the temperature dropped. The feed stuttered, then fractured into a dozen distorted frames as the vessel emitted a shockwave of energy so alien it defied every known principle. The shell around the vessel split fully apart, fragments drifting away like dead leaves, revealing the thing inside completely. And for a moment, one impossible moment, everyone saw it clearly. Not a ship, not a machine, something older. Something alive in the way a storm is alive. A geometry that shifted as it moved, edges bending into curves that folded into angles that shouldn't coexist. A design built for function unknown to any human category. A vessel not made to travel through space, but to enter something. The lights flickered again, and every monitor went black. A single line of text appeared on the central screen, stark and cold, unadorned by signal distortion or scrambling. A direct transmission, a final instruction. We arrive before you prepare. The room fell silent. Not fearful, not stunned, hollow. Because this wasn't a countdown anymore. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. And outside the atmosphere, drifting closer with accelerating precision, the vessel rotated one final time, aligning its impossible ring with Earth, like a key aligning with a lock.
The vessel did not slow down. It did not wobble, drift, or hesitate the way natural objects do when gravity tries to claim them. It carved through the solar system on a line so perfect it defied the language of orbital mechanics, a path that looked less like movement and more like intention drawn across a star map. And as it closed the final stretch toward Earth, the world outside the observatory finally began to wake up. Not because governments revealed anything, not because scientists broke their silence, but because the sky itself started to pulse. It was faint at first, a tremor of electromagnetic distortion that made radios hiss and phone screens flicker with phantom static. But by the second hour, it became visible. Thin ripples of faint violet shimmering across the upper atmosphere, as if space were pressing its hand against the sky, and the sky were bending inward to meet it. By the third hour, the distortion synced with the same interval as the vessel's pulses. The planet was responding. Whether by force or by resonance, no one knew, but the sky was opening. The observatory locked down as the global networks fell into chaos. Reports poured in from 3 continents, animals fleeing in coordinated patterns, tidal shifts a full centimeter higher than any model predicted, satellite gyros failing mid-orbit as if something were tugging on the magnetosphere. And the vessel. God, the vessel was close enough now for backyard telescopes to catch its silhouette. A dark, bone-like ring wrapped in shifting geometry, gliding through space with the certainty of a blade on its way to a target. The scientists in the observatory weren't speaking anymore. Their voices had been replaced by the quiet sound of breath held too long, the trembling clatter of keyboards touched by shaking hands, the soft, betraying click of someone's teeth chattering in a way they pretended was just the air conditioning. On the main screen, the live feed from the deep field array flickered into clarity. The vessel was filling the frame. Its structure was clearer now, bands of dark material rotating independently around the central ring, each layer shifting through impossible curves that bent perspective itself. It wasn't solid, it wasn't hollow, it was something between states. Geometry behaving like muscle, architecture behaving like intention. And at its center, the void pulsed like a second heart. "It's interacting with the magnetosphere," someone whispered, their voice dry and cracking. They were right. The latest spectrogram showed the vessel's pulses aligning with Earth's magnetic field lines, compressing them, stretching them, shaping them like clay. "What does it want?" another voice murmured. But the question went unanswered, because the lights dimmed again. Not flickering this time, but fading steadily, as if the room were being pulled into shadow by some vast hand outside the walls. The emergency generators kicked in, the lights came back, the screens did not. But one. A single terminal in the back of the room came alive, its monitor glowing with a soft white light. A direct channel, a connection. The scientists approached slowly as if the screen might bite. Text appeared. Not a scan, not a pulse. Language. "Your sky is thin." The director swallowed hard. "It's communicating directly now," he murmured. The screen flickered. "More must open." "What does that mean?" someone whispered. But before anyone could answer, the observatory shook. Not from impact, from resonance. The air felt thicker, denser, vibrating with a frequency that crawled into lungs and bones and teeth. Outside, a low groaning hum rose from the earth itself. The sky brightened, white, then gold, then a deep bruised violet, as if dawn and twilight were happening at the same time. Emergency alerts flooded every device in the room, satellites failing, aircraft rerouting, global auroras blooming far beyond the poles. The sky wasn't holding. It wasn't meant to. The vessel's pulses accelerated again, 37 seconds shrinking to 23, then 19, then 15, each interval pressing harder against the atmosphere until the clouds themselves vibrated in concentric waves. The sky bulged inward, distorting like a membrane straining to tear.
"It's not coming to us," the director whispered, voice shaking. "It's trying to bring us to it." The vessel's central ring flared, a beam of pure geometry, light-shaped, light-folded, light bent into something that wasn't light, lashed downward. For a heartbeat, the beam did nothing. And then it did everything. The atmosphere thinned, the ozone layer flexed, the magnetosphere shuddered like an injured animal. The ripples spread across the entire sky, visible in every hemisphere, a flash so bright that millions of people looked up and had no idea what they were seeing. In the observatory, every instrument overloaded. Screens went black. Servers smoked. The deep field feed died with a whine, like a dying breath. And then, silence. True silence. The kind that makes you aware of your own pulse. The scientists waited, eyes wide, lungs tight, minds racing, with the horror of not knowing whether the worst was over or about to begin. The silence broke. The final message arrived. Not through the dishes, not through the screens, through everything, through the bones in their chests and the metal in the walls and the signal pathways in every powered device on Earth, a message broadcast not to a machine, but to a planet. A vibration shaped into meaning. Not ready. Prepare. And then, after a pause so long it felt like the universe itself hesitated. We return when you can open the sky. The pressure stopped. The resonance faded. The sky dimmed back to blue. The vessel, impossibly, silently, changed course. It rotated, folding its geometry back into the ring, pulling the petals of its shell inward, and then it left. No acceleration, no thrust. Just a disappearance so abrupt it defied every instrument, a vanishing, as if the very fabric of space had been peeled back and the vessel had slipped behind it. Within minutes, global systems stabilized, satellites rebooted, the auroras faded, the trembling of the Earth subsided. Humanity exhaled without understanding what it had survived. In the observatory, no one spoke for a full 5 minutes. When they finally did, it was barely a whisper. They weren't here to invade. Another whisper, they weren't here to communicate. Another, they were here to test. And the director, voice hollow, added the final truth hanging in the air like a specter. And they expect us to pass. No one asked what the test was. No one dared. Because far above the recovering atmosphere, drifting beyond the limits of human reach, the last trace of the vessel's departure shimmered like a scar cut across the void. An afterimage, burned into the sky. A reminder. A warning. A promise. Soon had never been a threat. Here had never been a declaration. They were steps. Steps in a sequence not meant for us to understand yet. Steps in a process humanity had only just entered. The vessel would return. And next time, they would expect the sky to be open.